Greetings and surprise. I just felt like suddenly doing this because I had completed this text. So I want to share this discussion with you about whether or not there is a sidereal zodiac defined in chapter 1 of Surya Siddhanta. So I will begin by just explaining the argument that yes, there is a sidereal zodiac in Surya Siddhanta. So the argument goes like this. Surya Siddhanta defines the sidereal zodiac in chapter 1, specifically in texts 27 and 28. 127 says to use the end of Revati as the reference point. That may sound familiar. One second. 127 says to use the end of Revati as the reference point, and 128 says to count a complete revolution to and from that point by dividing it into 12 Rashi, and then dividing each of those into 30 Bhaga, and each of those into 60 Kala, and each of those into 60 Vikala. So, the Surya Siddhanta 127.28 defines a sidereal zodiac, which is a 12-fold division of the ecliptic based on the border between Ashwini and Revati. So that's the argument. So here's the reply. Let's make sure you understand the argument. The argument is, there you go. You got this revolution divided into 12 parts, divided in each one of those divided into 30, and each one of those divided into 60, and each one of those divided into 60. We know that geometry. That's the zodiac geometry, right? And then they say that that wheel is in reference to Posha, which is the star that defines Revati. And Posha is right on the border. Posha defines Revati by being on the border between Revati and Ashwini. So there you go. There's your sidereal zodiac. There's your 12-fold divisions, and it's anchored to the zodiac. That's the argument. Decent argument. That's why I want to discuss it, because it's a decent argument. This is one of the better ones in the how many years, in the 10 years that I've been looking for suggestions, like where is the sidereal zodiac defined? This is one of the better ones. So let's reply to this now. Is this a definition of the sidereal zodiac? So for argument's sake, let's begin by saying yes. Let's begin by agreeing, okay, cool, you just defined the sidereal zodiac from Surya Siddhanta. Now what? What do we do with the tropical zodiac that was defined later in the book? Ignoring it seems dishonest. But if we accept it, if we don't ignore it, then we're forced to ask why we have two conflicting definitions of one thing. So that's how I want to reply first of all. Okay, I'm not sure if you actually found a sidereal definition of the zodiac in chapter 1 of Surya Siddhanta, but let's say you did. Then what do we do with the tropical definition of the zodiac that's definitely there in chapter 14? Do we just pretend it's not there? That doesn't seem honest. That doesn't sit well. But if we don't pretend it's not there, why do we have one thing, a zodiac, defined in two uncomplementary ways? That becomes a difficult question. Now let's attempt to answer the question. For argument's sake, let's say this is intentional. We are meant to have two different definitions of the zodiac because one is meant for certain things and the other is meant for other things. For example, sidereal is used for charts and tropical for calendars. You've definitely heard this before if you're paying attention to any of the discussion and dialogue that's going on between siderealists and tropicalists. Hey, there's two. Both of them are okay, but they're both used for different things. That's why you have two different zodiacs. And chapter 1 defines the sidereal zodiac, and chapter 14 defines the tropical zodiac, and that's okay because we use them for two different things. For example, we use the sidereal for charts and we use the tropical for calendars. Okay, but that begs another question, and the question is why? This question is particularly vexing once we realize that a calendar and a zodiac map are two manifestations, temporal and spatial, of a single cosmic phenomenon. A fact that the Surya Siddhanta itself teaches us explicitly in 1410 when it says the 12 named Aries, etc., are identical to the months of the year. So in 1410, Surya Siddhanta says there's no difference between the months of a calendar and the signs of the zodiac. And the reason why there's no difference is because space and time are two manifestations of reality, the two aspects of reality. So the reality which produces the spatial zodiac, which means the location of things in space, is the same phenomenon which produces the temporal zodiac, which is the 12 months of the year. When you realize that a calendar is a temporal manifestation of the zodiac, and a chart with a zodiac in it is a spatial map of the zodiac, a spatial and a temporal manifestation of one thing, that makes it very difficult to answer the question: why do we have one thing defined in two different ways? Why are they used for two different things? Why are you saying that the sidereal zodiac should be used for charts and the tropical zodiac should be used for calendars? Why? What's the difference between a calendar and a chart when Surya Siddhanta says the 12 signs of the zodiac are identical to the months of a calendar? So if the sidereal definition correctly defines the locative manifestation of the zodiac, then why would it give an incorrect definition of the zodiac's temporal manifestation? So there's a locative or a spatial manifestation of the zodiac, and there's a temporal or a timey. There's a spacey manifestation and a timey manifestation. If the sidereal zodiac is good for the spacey manifestation, then why is it bad for the timey manifestation? And conversely, if the tropical zodiac is good for the timey manifestation, then why is it bad for the spacey manifestation? Why should it be? What do I mean by space? What is the timey manifestation of the zodiac? The timey manifestation is the 12 months of the year, which is what? The 12 lunations within one solar cycle. And what's the spacey manifestation of that? It's the sun's location during those 12 periods. What is Aries really supposed to be? It's supposed to be the area traversed by the sun while it's in the first lunation, the first idealized lunation after the equinox, or after a star or whatever. So the zodiac as a spatial thing that you use for a map on a chart is nothing but a spatial reflection of the zodiac as a calendar. So if one of our definitions is good for one of those things, then it should be good for both. Let me read that one more time. For argument's sake, okay, if this is this a definition of a sidereal zodiac? For argument's sake, let's begin by saying yes, it is. Well, then now, what do we do with the tropical zodiac defined later in the book? Ignoring it seems dishonest, but if we don't ignore it, we are forced to ask why we have two conflicting definitions of one thing. For argument's sake, let's say this is intentional. We are meant to have two different definitions of the zodiac because one is meant for certain things and the other is meant for other things. For example, sidereal is used for charts and tropical is used for calendars. This, however, begs the question, why? This question is particularly vexing once we realize that a calendar and a zodiac map are two manifestations of a single cosmic phenomenon, a fact that the Surya Siddhanta itself teaches us explicitly when it says the 12 named Aries, etc., are identical to the months of the year. If the sidereal's definition correctly defines the locative manifestation of the zodiac, the sun's location during the 12 months of the year, then why would it give an incorrect definition of the zodiac's temporal manifestation of that same zodiac? the months of the year themselves. Conversely, if the tropical definition is suited to define the zodiac's temporal manifestation, the 12 months, why is it unsuited to define the same zodiac's spatial manifestation, the sun's location during those months? Doesn't seem to make any sense. Now, Kirk Hood says, I've heard the tropical charts are more for material manifestation and sidereal charts are more for life paths. Why? Again, it just begs the question, why? If the tropical zodiac defines a zodiac in a certain way, why would it not just define it in another way? This is people trying to come to grips with having two competing definitions of the zodiac. And the way that we try to come to grips with it is saying, well, one's for one thing and another is for another. But if we're not in a rush to get done with the argument, we'll ask why. To offer another common example, some suggest that the tropical zodiac is meant for planetary latitudes, how far above or below the ecliptic a planet is. And the sidereal is meant for planetary longitudes, the planet's degree in a sign. However, if the tropical latitude is accurate, why would its longitude be inaccurate? Conversely, if the sidereal longitude is accurate, why would its latitude be inaccurate? This question is particularly, you might not understand how vexing this question is if you don't understand astronomical basics, but the question is particularly vexing once we realize that a planet's latitude and longitude are inseparable. The longitude determines the latitude and vice versa. The longitude of a planet means its position east to west in the zodiac. So if you say 15 degrees Aries, you're talking about a planet's longitude. And the latitude is its declination. How far north or south of it is the equator? Well, 0 degrees Aries is declination 0. And 0 degrees Capricorn is declination minus 23. And the maximum declination is 0 degrees Cancer. That's how you would use... That's how the declinations are assigned. They're determined by the latitude, and the latitude is determined by the longitude. So if you say the sidereal zodiac is what we get the longitude from, and the tropical zodiac is what we get the latitude from, then I need to know why. I want to ask why. If the longitude is accurate, then the latitude should be accurate because the two are inseparable. A planet, the orbit is like this. If this position is accurate, then this position is also accurate. If this position is inaccurate, then this part of it is inaccurate because you get this by doing this. At this point, you probably agree that accepting the two contrary definitions of a zodiac leads to questions that are very difficult, if not impossible, to satisfactorily answer. Right? You might not even be able to understand how impossible it is to answer these questions. These are rhetorical questions. But you can definitely understand that this is tricky stuff. So we run into this tricky mess when we say, okay, there's two definitions of the zodiac. Which we might say if we think chapter 1 of the Sidereal Zodiac says... Chapter 1 of the Surya Siddhanta says the zodiac is sidereal. It's based on Pusha, which is Revati's Yogatar. And chapter 14 is tropical, so we have two different definitions. That brings up a lot of problems. So, let's entertain, for argument's sake, the option that 1, 27, and 28 of Surya Siddhanta does not define a sidereal zodiac. All these difficult questions would just go away if we didn't have two different competing definitions of the zodiac. So, for argument's sake, let's see if maybe there aren't two competing definitions of the zodiac. If there's not two competing definitions of the zodiac, then what the heck is chapter 1 of Surya Siddhanta talking about when it said this stuff? When it said the end of the end of Revati is a reference point, and then you have 12 Rashi from it, and each one is divided into 30 degrees. And so what is that all about then? If that's not a sidereal definition, then what is it? Well, I would just start by looking at text 26 and 29, 25 and 30. And let's see what this chapter is about. After all, neither 1, 27, 28, nor any of the surrounding text in the chapter mentions anything about the zodiac or gives any reference to anything like Aries, Taurus, etc. If this is indeed a definition of the zodiac, the author failed to be very clear about it. Curiously, the author did not fail to be very clear at all when giving a tropical definition of the zodiac. This makes it seem doubtful that Chapter 1 indeed intended to define the zodiac. So in 127 and 28, what we have is this shape that is the same as the zodiac shape. This geometrical matrix of how you measure degrees and minutes and seconds and Rashis. But he never said anything about this is Aries and Taurus, by the way. Even though he still could have, and it still may not have been a sidereal definition because the geometry has gone so far that they refer to the first arc as Aries and they refer to the second arc of any circle as Taurus. And just in Sanskrit, a way of saying 181 degrees is to say Libra 1 degree. It doesn't even have to do anything with astronomy or astrology. It just has to do with geometry. However, he didn't. He could have even, and still wouldn't have been sure that it was a definition of the zodiac. He didn't say this is Aries. So if that's a definition of the zodiac, the author was curiously vague there. Whereas compared to in chapter 14, when he defines the tropical zodiac, he is explicit. How explicit is he? He says, I'll show you later actually how explicit he is. We might reply that 128 indeed uses the word Rashi, which we might recognize as zodiac sign. However, that argument would only convince people who are not very familiar with Sanskrit and its geometry terms. Monier-Williams is a widely accredited Sanskrit-English dictionary. It's an understatement. It's practically the Sanskrit-English dictionary since the 1900s. According to it, the word Rashi means 1, a group or quantity of anything. 2, a sum of other numbers. 3, a twelfth of a circle. Or 4, a sign of the zodiac as a sum of degrees, minutes, and seconds. So according to Monier-Williams, the best that he could figure out, because he also notes that the dhatu is unclear. The derivation of the word, the etymology of the word is not clear. Although I feel it's clear, but I'll leave my opinion out of it. Monier-Williams says that the word basically means an accumulation of other things, like a sum. Coming to a sum of things. And that's why a twelfth of a circle is a very important sum because of that natural rhythm of 12 lunations in one solation. And so the word Rashi means that many degrees. That accumulation of Kala, Vikala, and Bhaga makes a Rashi. So it doesn't mean zodiac sign, it means an amount of space. All should be able to objectively agree that the definition of the tropical zodiac, I mean, it can mean zodiac. It does mean zodiac sign, but the reason why it means zodiac sign is because zodiac sign is 30 degrees. This, in other words, the only reference to zodiac is that the word Rashi is there. But Rashi doesn't mean zodiac sign, it means accumulation of degrees and minutes. So that's not very clear. Compare it to chapter 14. Chapter 14, where he defined the tropical zodiac, was extremely clear. He says, these are the 12 months of the year which are identical to the 12 signs known as Aries, Taurus, etc., through which the daylight waxes and wanes as the sun progresses. It's obvious that he's talking about the zodiac there. In contrast, 127 to 28 is extremely vague. It merely defines the geometry that the zodiac shares. Now, we can turn to text 26 and 30 and 25 and 31, etc. We could look at the whole chapter to try to understand what it's about. What is this statement about? That would be wise. In fact, the chapter shows that this geometry, multiples of 1, 12, and 30, stretches not just through the zodiac scale time span of years and days and hours, but all the way down to seconds and all the way up to eons and epochs. In other words, this geometry is not found only in the zodiac, it's shared with all the natural time scales. So I made a post in YouTube post recently sharing the data, what's all discussed in chapter 1 of Surya Siddhanta, and every single time scale, from Pran to Vinadi to Nadi to Dina to Masa to Vatsara. All of them are just multiples of 1, 12, and 30. All the way to Kala, all the way down to Kalpa, Yuga, it's all multiples of 1, 12, and 30. And so it's not like, wow, this is a multiple of 1, 12, and 30, so it must be the zodiac. The 1, 12, and 30 system. And why? Because those are the numbers that are very clean to divide into each other. That 1, 12, and 30 system is just a system of math and a system of geometry that's very ubiquitous. What's perfectly clear to anyone who reads the chapter from start to finish is that the author has no intention of divining the zodiac here at all. Actually, the first chapter has nothing to do with the zodiac. What does it have to do with? If you read it, and I'll share it with you next, what is actually in the first chapter. It's quite exciting, actually, and interesting. What is the first chapter all about? Just go ahead and read it. You can download a PDF on the internet, Surya Siddhanta PDF. It's super obvious, you don't have to be a mathematician, what the first chapter is about. The author intends to explain the various units of time, starting from things that are like seconds, which he calls breaths, and going up to years, and then going up to cosmic years, and then going up through the collections of cosmic years, which are yugas, manvantaras, and kalpas, and then going up to the collections of kalpas, which are Brahma's days, Brahma's months, Brahma's years, and then Brahma's life. That's what the whole first part of the first chapter is about. That's why I say it's perfectly clear to anyone who reads the chapter from start to finish, or just the start, is that the author has no intention of defining a zodiac here at all. He intends to explain the various units of time, from seconds through years and up to cosmic eons. And the reason why he's doing that and Surya Siddhanta is because the first thing Surya Siddhanta does is say, this is your point in time. This is where you are in cosmic history, and here's how to know it. And after all, astrology is a science of time. We're trying to understand the past and the future from the present, because we know the motions of things and how things change and at what rate. Therefore, we can extrapolate the past from the present and the future from the present. So what the Surya Siddhanta starts off by saying is, this is the span of time that the whole universe exists within, and let's put a red spot on the map that says you are here, right where we are right now. So he explains all the stuff about the time, and he says, okay, we're at this point, and from this particular point, we're in the end of the golden age of Krita Yuga, of the second kalpa, of the second half of Brahma's life. From that point to the exact point where he was speaking Surya Siddhanta, he says you use astronomy to figure out the exact point. So that begins with 127. 127, which is what is the beginning of the claim of a sidereal zodiac, is actually the beginning of where the author of Surya Siddhanta is going to teach us how to determine where we are in the yugas. It doesn't have to do with what your birth chart is. It has to do with understanding where you are in the yugas. And he says to do that, you'll measure sidereal revolutions in reference to Pisces. Well, I don't know what that Greek symbol is, how to pronounce it. But in reference to Posha star, to the star of Revati. So text 27 and 28 begin the section where astronomical factors are used to ascertain our exact current point in cosmic history. For this, he employs the more observationally convenient method of measuring sidereal revolutions. So you may ask, why does he use sidereal revolutions? Because it's very easy it's relatively easy to measure revolutions of things against stars, because you can see them. Measuring revolutions of things against 0 degrees Aries is difficult, as he's going to explain in the next chapter, because you have to do that with shadows on the ground and weird circles with weird lines drawn in them. So it's not easy. It's not something you just look at. So the Drik Siddhanta, or the visual astronomy, is easier. It's more convenient. So we're going to measure the revolutions, and then the chapter goes on to explain there's this many revolutions, of sidereal revolutions of stars in an age, and there's this many revolutions for the sun, and if you subtract this number from that number, you get the number of X and Y, and this is how you know where we are right now, because the planets are in this position. It means that this much time has elapsed since they were in that position, which is the position at which the current age started. So far from 127 and 28 to finding a sidereal zodiac, it's actually a much different thing altogether. It's just a way of measuring a planet's progress in its orbit, and its sidereal orbit. You could say, now again, you can say, well, isn't that a sidereal zodiac? But if you did, then you come up with all these problems of, now, how does it match with the other zodiac? So I think I'm just going to, before I wrap up the thing, I think I'll just reread this whole thing one more time so that you can pull it all back together. But in conclusion, if 127 and 28 defines the zodiac, then it has 2 flaws. Number 1, it's not explicit. It didn't say, this is the zodiac, Mesha, Rishab. It didn't say, this is the zodiac, Aries, Taurus, and so on. It didn't say the sun waxes and wanes, but he did say that in chapter 14. So that's the first problem. If 127 and 28 is a sidereal definition of the zodiac, then it's not very explicit. And 2, it presents complications with a competing and incompatible definition given elsewhere in the same book. We could try to wrestle with these complications, but that is difficult and seems unnecessary, since 127 and 28 are not about the zodiac in the first place. They're actually part of a system to measure cosmic time using sidereal planetary revolutions. Alrighty. Spacebug sat it out. I can't tell you about what your charts feels right to you and doesn't feel right to you, Kamran Chaudhry, because that's about your feelings and your opinions of things. And if I sat down to you and explained Chinese astrology to you really well, my explanation was really good, then you would think, man, Chinese astrology is much better than this other junk. Or if I sat down and I came up with a system that had nothing to do with astrology but became very helpful to you, then you would think, well, astrology is quite useless. This other thing is very useful. We're not talking about what works best for you, what feels best to you, because that's all very highly subjective. We're trying to deal with simpler things, much simpler things. That's very complicated stuff. How an interpretation is made, how it resonates with you. That's complex. Let's get the simple stuff out of the way first, like, what is the zodiac? So just to reiterate, and by the way, this argument was first presented by Antardweep Das, and that's the link to where it was published first. And I intend to do 3 other arguments, although number 4, this one here, I've already done that. I did that like last week. And actually, I already did this one too, right? Ashwini begins with Aries. We did that like last week as well. That was the 3-finger explanation. So I guess really I only have this Ayana infers a sidereal zodiac to talk about, which is actually included in this too, if you know about that. Anyway, people, why can't these sidereal astrologers understand your analysis? They could if they would want to. But they just don't want to. They don't want to. On the contrary, I want to understand the sidereal arguments. That's why I took this effort. Somebody said, Surya Siddhanta defines a sidereal zodiac. So I went and I studied the first chapter of Surya Siddhanta to figure it out. After all, I was doing sidereal astrology for 2 years professionally. And then people started saying, this guy Ernst, blah, blah, blah. And so I read his arguments and then I started checking them out. If you want to not be wrong, then you'll never really find out that you're wrong. And it doesn't matter if it's about a zodiac or if it's about who is supposed to do the dishes. If you don't want to be wrong, you're not going to realize how you were wrong. And if you don't want a thing to be a certain way, you won't see it that way. Just like the wife whose husband is a monster, and it takes her like 18 years to finally admit that this guy is a monster, because she didn't want to be married to a monster. Similarly, there's that dynamic. There's the emotions and the filter that they put on truth. So I'll just read this to you again. The argument is that the Surya Siddhanta defines the sidereal zodiac in chapter 1, 27 and 28. 127 says, you use the end of Revati as the reference point, and 128 says to count a complete revolution to and from that point. That's the key. He's talking about revolutions in chapter 1. In chapter 1, they want to know how many times did Mercury go around. And therefore, if it went around this many times in one age, and it's here now, we can do math to figure out how many years must have passed. That's the essence of what chapter 1 is all about. So he wants to know how many times did Mercury go around, and where is it right now? And to know where it is right now in a partial orbit, you'll need to break that orbit down into Rashi, degrees, minutes, and seconds, or Rashi, Bhaga, Vikala, and Kala and Vikala. So 127 says use the end of Revati as the reference point, which is interesting too. It's not Chitra Paksha either. It's not Pushya Paksha. It's Revati Paksha. If this is a sidereal zodiac, that's the other thing. People say, "Oh, it's a sidereal zodiac," but they don't want to. They don't agree on an Ayan Amsha. If this a sidereal zodiac was defined somewhere, don't you think the particular star would have been defined as well? If there is actually some definition somewhere that the zodiac begins with star X, and hence it's sidereal, then don't you think they would have told you what star X is? But yet all the sidereal astrologers don't agree on what star X is. I bet you that means that there's no definition of it anywhere. But here, the Surya Siddhanta says, well, let's use Pausha, which is the Revati Yogatara, as star X, to count the beginning and an ending of a revolution. Then divide that unit into 12 Rashi and divide each of those into 30 Bhagas, and each of those into 60 Kalas, and each of those into 60 Vikalas. So there you go. Surya Siddhanta 127 and 28 defines a sidereal zodiac, a 12-fold division of the ecliptic based on the Ashwini-Revati border. The reply is this a definition of the sidereal zodiac? For argument's sake, let's begin by saying yes, it is. So now what do we do with the tropical zodiac defined later in the book? Ignoring it seems dishonest. But if we don't ignore it, we are forced to ask why we have two conflicting definitions of one thing, and that is the problem. That is making so much hot air. People trying to answer this question, that is not an answerable question, it's a rhetorical question. For argument's sake, though, let's say it's intentional. We are meant to have two different definitions of the zodiac because one is meant for certain things and the other is meant for other things. For example, and here's just two examples. There's a billion different hot airs out there about use the sidereal for this and the tropical for that. Tropical is more about your body. Sidereal is more about your soul. Tropical is more about whatever. Sidereal is more about whatever else. So here's two examples. For example, Sidereal is used for charts. Tropical is used for calendars. This, however, begs the question, why? Why? If it's the same thing, then why have two definitions of it in the first place that are different? And why would one be good for one thing and the other be good for another? This question is particularly vexing once we realize that a calendar and the zodiac map are two manifestations, temporal and spatial, of a single cosmic phenomenon. And the way that we define the cosmic phenomenon is what's in question here. A fact the Surya Siddhanta itself teaches us explicitly in 1410 when it says the 12 named Aries, etc. are identical to the months of the year. The months of the calendar are the same as the zodiac signs according to Surya Siddhanta. So what are you saying? That the sidereal zodiac is for the zodiac signs and the tropical zodiac is for the calendar months. But Surya Siddhanta said the calendar months and the zodiac signs are one thing. The two aspects of one thing, a space aspect versus a time aspect. If the sidereal definition correctly defines the locative manifestation of the zodiac, the sun's location during the 12 months of the year, then why would it give an incorrect definition of the zodiac's temporal manifestation, the months of the year themselves? Conversely, if the tropical definition is suited to define the zodiac's temporal manifestation, the 12 months, why is it unsuited to define the same zodiac's spatial manifestation, the sun's location during those months? That doesn't make much sense. To offer another common example, some suggest that the tropical zodiac is meant for planetary latitudes, how far above or below the ecliptic a planet is, and the sidereal is meant for planetary longitudes, the planet's degree in a sign. However, if tropical latitude is accurate, why would its longitude be inaccurate? Conversely, if sidereal longitude is accurate, why would its latitude be inaccurate? This question is particularly vexing once we realize that a planet's latitude and longitude are inseparable. The planet's longitude in the zodiac determines its latitude. And thus its latitude determines its longitude in the zodiac. At this point, you probably agree that accepting two contrary definitions of the zodiac leads to questions that are very difficult, if not impossible, to satisfactorily answer. Therefore, let us entertain for argument's sake the option that 1, 27, and 28 does not define a sidereal zodiac. After all, neither 1, 27, 28, nor any of the surrounding texts in the chapter mentions anything about the zodiac, or gives any reference to anything like Aries, Taurus, etc. If this is indeed a definition of the zodiac, the author failed to be very clear about it. Curiously, the author did not fail to be very clear at all when giving a tropical definition of the zodiac. This makes it seem doubtful that chapter 1 indeed intended to define the zodiac. We might reply that I'm going to delete this, and this is unnecessary. That might reply that 128. We might reply that 128 uses the word Rashi, which we might recognize as meaning zodiac sign. However, that argument will only convince people who are not very familiar with Sanskrit or its geometry terms. Monier Williams, is a widely accredited Sanskrit English dictionary, and according to it, the word Rashi means a group or quantity of anything. By the way, if you're like, Monier Williams is a dictionary given by English people, then go ahead and look up Amar Kosh. And if you can't look up Amar Kosh, then go ahead and look at Monier Williams, and you'll see that his citations for every single one of his definitions is Rig Veda, this Veda, that Veda. Monier Williams, a widely accredited Sanskrit English dictionary. According to it, the word Rashi means a group or quantity of anything, a sum of other numbers, a twelfth of a circle. It's a geometrical term for a twelfth of a circle. A sign of the zodiac as a sum of degrees, minutes, and seconds, making it a twelfth of a circle, according to him. I personally have a different opinion, but I don't care about that right now. All should be able to objectively agree that the definition of the tropical zodiac in chapter 14 is extremely clear and specific. Quote, these are the 12 months of the year which are identical to the 12 signs known as Aries, Taurus, etc., through which the daylight waxes and wanes as the sun progresses in its orbit. In contrast, 128 and 27 is extremely vague. It merely defines a geometry that the zodiac shares. Now, how compelling is it that this geometry is the same as the zodiac's geometry? It might seem very compelling if you didn't realize that geometry is everywhere. In fact, the chapter shows that this geometry, multiples of 1, 12, and 30, stretches not just through the zodiac scale time spans of years, days, and hours, but all the way down to seconds and all the way up to eons and epochs. I mean, there's really interesting things also. When we finally do go over chapter 1, it's very interesting. There's 21,600 breaths in a day. And there's 21,600 seconds in the whole arc, in the whole circle of the zodiac. And 21,600 is a pretty interesting number, as it has to do with roughly the precession of equinoxes. There's all kinds of very, very, very cool things that are in chapter 1. So the reason for all of this similarity is because all of them are 1, 12, 30, 1, 12, 30, 1, 12, 30. So it's not like anything that has 1, 12, 30 must be the zodiac. So there's no real reason to think that 1, 27, and 28 define a sidereal zodiac. I mean, we can if we want to, but we're not told explicitly this is the zodiac. If we want that to be a definition of the sidereal zodiac, we can make it a definition of the sidereal zodiac, but then we have to deal with the fact that we can't ignore the definition that was told to us directly, explicitly in 14, that the zodiac is affixed to the equinoxes and solstices. So then we have to figure out some way of having these two different zodiacs on one plate. These two definitions of what a thing is that are not complementary. One thing says a thing is right there, and the other thing is a thing is right there, but it can't be there and there. What's perfectly clear to anyone who reads the chapter from start to finish is that the author has no intention of defining a zodiac here at all. He intends to explain the various units of time, from seconds through years up to enormous cosmic eons. Text 27 and 28 begin the section where astronomical factors are used to ascertain our exact current point in cosmic history. And for this, he employs the more observationally convenient method of measuring sidereal revolutions, and he uses the 1, 20, 30, 60 thing to measure the revolutions. So you might think that he's defined a zodiac, a sidereal zodiac, for this purpose. If he did, then it's for this purpose. That's another thing to say. That would actually answer the question. If this is a sidereal definition of the zodiac, and in chapter 14 we have a tropical definition of the zodiac, maybe they're intentionally different for two different things. That would actually be a good solution to this. The one that's in chapter 21 is meant for measuring sidereal revolutions to determine our point in cosmic time. The one that's defined in chapter 14 is meant for everything else. I like that. That's a good way of resolving it. In conclusion, if 127 and 28 defines the zodiac, it has two flaws. One, it was not explicit, and two, it presents complications with a completing and incompatible definition given elsewhere in the same book. We could try to wrestle with these complications, but that is difficult and seems unnecessary, since 127 and 28 are not about the zodiac. They are actually part of a system to measure cosmic time using sidereal planetary revolutions, and I will leave you with that. And I think I'm going to post this on my blog in a second in a text form. So if you want to be able to refer to it in text form, my blog is vicdecara.blog. So thank you.